My name's Jennifer Killian. Today I'm presenting to you about tribal courts. We're going to take a closer look at the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska specifically to get an understanding for tribal courts in Indian law. I'd like to go over a brief history of the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska. First of all, there are two Ponca tribes. One is in Nebraska and the other one's in Oklahoma. And the way that started is the Ponca tribe was originally in Nebraska, but because of the Trail of Tears, was forced off their lands and relocated to Oklahoma. So this is where Chief Standing Bear's legacy comes in, and really what stands out as far as the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska in history. Chief Standing Bear and the Ponca tribe were relocating to Oklahoma, as I stated, and it was really a hard journey, and they suffered a lot of loss. And one of the members of the tribe was Chief Standing Bear's son, who got sick and died. And he made his dad promise to bury him back in the homelands in Nebraska. So, being a man of his word, he headed back from Oklahoma to Nebraska to bury his son in the homelands and the burial grounds there. He was arrested in Omaha and imprisoned, and that's where he gave his famous I'm a Man speech, which was one of the first times that the United States law actually recognized Native Americans as humans with human rights. So he's a really big deal as far as the Ponca tribe in Nebraska. And that's the statue you see there on the right that's in Washington, D.C. There is also a replica of that statue in Lincoln, Nebraska, near the University of Nebraska. So that's really where the tribe got split, because not everybody came back with Standing Bear. Only a few people did. So that's why you have the Ponca tribe of Oklahoma and the Ponca tribe of Nebraska. So fast forward a little bit, and the Ponca tribe of Nebraska was one of the tribes to be terminated during the termination era. So the termination was complete by 1966. It didn't happen overnight. I believe it was done in phases. Regardless, when it was terminated, what happened was 442 Poncas were removed from the tribal rolls, and also any remaining land and holdings and property assets, all of that was dissolved under the termination. So not quite a quarter century later, but almost, the Ponca tribe of Nebraska was able to be restored as a federally recognized tribe during the Restoration Act. This happened on October 31st, 1990. And one of the provisions of becoming a federally recognized tribe, the state of Nebraska negotiated and stipulated that the Ponca tribe not have any reservation lands. So that's also what makes the Ponca tribe of Nebraska different. So it has service areas. And service areas are lands in trust. Basically, there are 5 different offices. Within 100 miles of those offices are considered service areas. Anybody outside of that radius is outside the service areas, which makes it interesting when it comes to federal funding and grants, for example. So there are 5 locations, 4 of which are in Nebraska, 1 in Sioux City, Iowa. There's Niobrara, Nebraska, the headquarters. There is Norfolk, there's Lincoln, and there's Omaha, Nebraska, where the offices are located. So this is also different compared to other tribes because it is a public law 280 state in Nebraska. Remember, that's the law that was set up for the termination era to help transition tribes to basically to terminate and for the state to take over for the things that the federal government was funding before, like tribal courts and jurisdiction. So the Ponca tribe in Nebraska does not have criminal proceedings, but civil proceedings in its court, and that is because of the public law 280, where the state has concurrent jurisdiction. So you can't really talk about tribal courts and tribal sovereignty without first taking a look at treaties. So here we've got a couple of early treaties with the Poncas. The first one around 1817 just has 3 articles. The first one, Article 1 stating that any past injury or hostility is forgotten, forgiven. The past is in the past, so to speak. Article 2 basically saying that the Poncas in the United States will have a relationship of peace and friendship. And then Article 3, the Ponca tribe acknowledges they are under the protection of the United States. And then just 8 years later, you see a little bit of an expansion in another treaty between the Ponca tribe and the United States. Article 1, basically the Poncas acknowledge that the U.S. is supreme and they can regulate the tribe's trade, and also acknowledges they're under the protection of the United States again. Article 2, another reiteration of the relationship of friendship, and also that the United States will provide protection to the Poncas. Article 3 has to do with the trade that the United States regulates over the Ponca tribe, or with the Ponca tribe, stating that the Ponca tribe will only trade and have commerce with U.S. citizens, and also in the designated areas that the U.S. approves. Article 4, you're looking at jurisdiction over tribal lands. Specifically, this one has to do with non-Ponca members, such as traders, people who want to trade. If they are in Ponca tribal lands and they don't have permission to be there, they're not approved, they're not licensed, they're not authorized, the Ponca tribe is stipulated to apprehend and to arrest, and then also to deliver that person in violation to the United States agent or office, so that that person can be held accountable under the United States law. Basically saying that the tribe doesn't have jurisdiction to try that person underneath the tribal laws. And also it has a part that's there for traders who are authorized, licensed, or approved to be in Ponca tribal lands to conduct trade or commerce with the Indians of the Ponca tribe, that whoever's traveling with them, their party or company, along with themselves and their property, will be safe. The Poncas agree not to attack, raid, or injure the trader's company or party or their property. So then Article 5 talks about U.S. jurisdiction over non-Poncas in Ponca lands. So this has to do with non-Poncas who commit a crime, act of violence, injure individuals, or cause harm to the tribe, for example, that the Ponca tribe does not have jurisdiction to try them under the tribal law, but that the U.S. does have that jurisdiction. So again, the Poncas are expected to apprehend, arrest, or deliver that person, that non-Ponca person who committed crimes in the Ponca lands, to the United States to hold them accountable under the U.S. laws. And then Article 6, this one has to do with, let me back up for a second. Article 5 also has a piece on there that if non-Poncas have been robbed, say for instance their horses have been stolen, their belongings, and those horses or belongings end up in Ponca tribal lands, that the tribe will do what they can to help bring those items found on tribal lands back to the non-Poncas who are outside of the tribal lands, that they'll assist in that recovery process. Wanted to bring that up as well. Article 6 has to do with the Poncas agreeing to be loyal and look out for the best interests of the United States by not trading or selling or having commerce with anybody who is an enemy of the United States, whether they're a foreign nation or another Indian tribe, that they won't sell them weapons or have any dealings with those people. I just want to look at another treaty with the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska. This one's from 1865. In this, there are 4 different articles. And basically, I'll just jump right in. Article 1 has to do with the 30,000 acres of land the Ponca tribe agrees to cede to the United States. 30 acres of reservation land. It specifically spells out in this article the tracts of land that are being ceded to the United States. It gives very specific detail, but I won't go over that just for sake of time. And then Article 2 basically is saying that if the Ponca tribe cedes the land and pretty much does it without a fight, that their reward is then the United States will cede back to the Poncas the sites that they hold deer, the burial grounds, and the cornfields. And then this actually spells out as well the specific tract of lands that are being given back. It specifies what those areas are for the Ponca people. Article 3 has to do with the government of the United States. They agreed to make a payment of $15,000.80, and basically this, and word for word, is for spoliation committed upon them. So basically, they're paying them for harm or injury that the Ponca people had experienced. And this is actually stipulated in a different treaty. It specifically says the first paragraph of Article 2 of the 1858 treaty with the Poncas. So this is just a fulfillment of that previous stipulation. They basically are agreeing to pay what they said they would. So Article 4 is talking about whatever expenses are involved with the U.S. traveling to negotiate this treaty that the U.S. is going to cover. They're not going to charge the Ponca tribe. Next, I want to take a look at the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska and the government structure that's in place. It does have a constitution, basically what we consider an IRA constitution, kind of a similar template that was adopted and used by many tribes under the Indian Reorganization Act. The Ponca Tribe of Nebraska also has a council as far as its government's concerned. It's called the Tribal Council. There are 9 members on that governing body. They are elected by popular vote from the 4 different districts that the tribe is split into, 4 different districts, and each of them serves a 4-year term at a time. And so the way it works is it's staggered every 2 years. So one tribal rep is up for election or re-election every 2 years in each district, if that makes sense. So there's never 2 in one district up for election at the same time. It alternates. So there's always at least one steady tribal rep to help with the transition of a new tribal rep if need be. And so the chairperson is actually elected at large. The districts can only vote for their district reps that are running, and then everybody can vote for the chair. And then each member of council can serve 2 consecutive terms. So that's a total of 8 years, and then they have to take 2 years off. So there's not a limit on how many times they can serve. They just have to take a 2-year break every 8 years. So that's just a rule that they have there as well. Let's take a look at the tribal courts of the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska. It is governed by the Law and Order Codes and the Constitution of the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska. That is where the tribal courts have their power. It's where they are given their authority. And their duty is to uphold the Constitution and the Law and Order Codes that previous and current tribal council governing bodies have passed. They are located in the Norfolk, Nebraska location of the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska. I've got the address, phone number, and fax on this slide. The nice thing about the tribal courts for the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska is they actually will travel to different locations, because again, the Ponca Tribe has 5 locations and offices, so they will travel. Usually court is once a month on a Wednesday, and they will go to the different locations. They won't just stay in Norfolk. They'll go to Omaha, they'll go to Lincoln, they'll go to Niobrara, they'll go to Sioux City, Iowa. And that is something they do for the members, especially when you've got elders who can't video conference in or have trouble with dialing in on the phone and they want to be in person. There's still quite a few people who prefer to be in person for trials, even though since COVID happened, the video conferencing and phone has been an option for people to attend court. And even actually before that some. But the nice thing is that they do make it convenient for people by traveling to the different locations for those who want to show up in person to not burden them with additional travel. We're going to take a closer look at the law and order codes and the provisions that they provide as far as the tribal courts are concerned. Um, Between the Constitution and the Law and Order Code, there is an establishment of the tribal court. It discusses specifically the separation of powers, the different definition and court terms and what they mean and how they should be interpreted to mean, rules of conduct. There's also policies, procedures, a discussion of filing fees, discussion of attorneys and how they qualify for tribal court. Also, the option for lay counsel, which is different from an attorney. It's somebody knowledgeable but not necessarily a lawyer or attorney that's fully barred and legally trained. Also, it talks about the selection of judges, the appointment of judges, the removal of judges, the disqualification of judges is also included in that. The powers and duties of those judges also talks about the rules of procedure, and of course, what the process is to appeal. And it goes into more depth about the types of motions and types of filings and briefs. Specifically, there's massive amounts of information and lots of painful details about exactly how the tribal courts work and the roles and the procedures, and it provides for many aspects of what the tribal courts should be and how they should be run. There is specifics to the civil procedure, the kinds of cases that are heard in the tribal court of the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska are civil cases because of the Public Law 280. And so there's discussion about how it handles ICWA, child welfare, children in need of supervision, guardianship, abuse and neglect, juvenile court with the custody overall, and then you've got domestic relations, whether it's a marriage license or it's an annulment or it's a divorce, separation, child custody, alimony, visitation, child support, etc. And then also you've got the protection from domestic abuse, and you've got the handling of adoption of children and guardianship. And of course, that's outside of the ICWA Child in Need of Care foster care system. So they handle it both private adoption and through the foster care system or the guardianship under ICWA. So there's a lot of information there. Let's take a look at the tribal court positions and staff of the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska. It is a small court system. There are judges. There's one court administrator, one tribal court clerk of court, and one court specialist. And those are the staff members who are employed by the tribal courts. And then there's kind of like an oversight committee, the Law and Justice Committee. This group of people, they are selected by tribal council. And what they do is they actually evaluate the judges. They give evaluations for the staff of the tribal court. They review law and order codes and resolutions that are proposed. They also look at current law and order codes to see if there's more efficient wording, more efficient aspects of it they can add, things that should be changed. They take recommendations from different areas of the tribe. They look it over, and a lot of times the tribal the tribal attorneys involved in that process as well as for instance, the court administrator, she's on the Law and Justice Committee, and also there will be somebody from different areas, like, for instance, social services, domestic violence, ICWA specialist, the tax commission, anybody who is a subject matter expert on the different areas of the tribe that may have something end up in tribal court. The Law and Justice Committee might include those people. And then they are the oversight and kind of an added layer of protection and checks and balances as far as reviewing and weighing in on important matters for the tribal court. The Law and Order Code that sets up the tribal courts has provisions and rules for attorneys. It's important to know that the tribal court does not provide any legal representation. So, a member who has an issue or a case before the court can represent themselves, or they can hire their own outside attorney, or they can hire what is called a layman, who is somebody who's not actually an attorney, but also might be able to represent them just with their legal knowledge. Regardless, I put on here word for word what it says, but to kind of sum it up, it says that attorney has to be in good standing with the bar or eligible to practice before the bar of any United States court. I think it's important to note that it's not a specific state that the bar is required or for an attorney to be a part of a bar. So it's any court. And then also it says on here that they basically must have a good record, no blemishes on their track record, no disbarment, no suspension. So that's listed there as well. And then there's a $100 administrative fee for practicing law in the tribal courts. And that fee is sometimes waived, but it takes a tribal council resolution. And then if the attorney gets approved and admitted, they have to take an oath, and they have to consent to the court's exercise of disciplinary jurisdiction. Now we're going to take a look at the judges of the Ponca tribal courts. There is not a requirement for membership. Judges do serve a 6-year term, and the judges are actually nominated by a judicial nominating committee, and that committee is made up of 5 people that the tribal council selects and appoints. Once the judges have been nominated and deemed qualified by that nominating committee, they present their choices or selections before the tribal council, who then the tribal council certifies if those applicants are qualified. And then from there, the tribal council will select who the chief justice is and who the justices are in the open hearing. The Ponca tribal courts are pretty traditional, more like a Western court. There is no culture involved in it, not even opening prayer, for example, or invocation is what it's called. So it's really traditional, and it has 4 basic steps. It's pretty simple, really, to get a grasp for the basics. There's a petition where a member can file a claim against parties. They file that petition directly with tribal court, and then the tribal court will send out notification to all the parties involved. Usually they use a county sheriff, for example. And then once all the parties have been notified, then a pre-trial is set. And usually that happens pretty quick, within a month, because they do have monthly Wednesdays once a month where the court does hear pre-trials and trials. So if it passes the pre-trial test and there is a claim to be heard, then it gets scheduled for trial, goes on to trial. The claim is presented by the parties involved, and then the court makes a decision. And then if any of the parties involved are not happy with that decision, that's where the appeals process comes in which case any of the parties can file an appellate court. And the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska does have an appellate court with 3 judges who will hear the appeals. So it's also important to note that decisions from tribal court, they're not subject to review from the tribal council. So they do try to keep that separate so that there's no influence. The only thing that seems to be a conflict of interest really is that the tribal council is picking the judge and the judge is. So it would seem like there would be an incentive to keep them happy, the tribal council, and rule in their favor if they're ever in the hot seat. But again, when you have such a small tribe and limited resources, sometimes there really isn't a way around that. and possibly that could change for tribes in the future. After taking a deeper dive into the tribal courts and looking at it specifically with the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska, um, you'll note that there is so many painstaking details involved in setting up the tribal courts, set up and the processes and the procedures, and basically it's because tribal courts are very important to tribal sovereignty. And to really kind of illustrate that, it's important to know that tribal sovereignty is split into two parts. There's the external part where other sovereigns recognize your sovereignty as a tribe. They recognize that you have jurisdiction over your people and that you don't have jurisdiction over their people. Like they recognize and acknowledge that you have your own areas, your own territories, your own people. On the other side of it is the internal sovereignty. And this is where tribes have control over their internal affairs, just like it sounds. And that is their ability to make laws, to pass laws, to enforce laws, prosecute laws, their ability to decide their membership, their ability to pick their government structure, their ability to even write their constitution in whatever format they want. And in some cases, tribes have only an oral constitution, it's not even written down. And then, of course, you've got the tribal courts. So basically, the tribal courts is how you uphold your laws, the laws of the constitution of the tribe, and laws and law and order codes and resolutions. And you uphold them, you enforce them. That is the very definition of your tribal sovereignty in a lot of ways, because a lot of tribal sovereignty has boiled down to jurisdictional questions and who has the right to decide and who has the power, who has the authority. So tribal courts are really important because tribes need to exercise their right to decide their jurisdiction. They need to. They need to have remedies, solutions, policies, procedures in place. They need to have these things. Basically, not just to build confidence in their ability to self-govern and to enact and pass and actually enforce their laws, but also any time that a tribe is lacking in having something in place, a remedy or solution, um, that's when there's a risk of the federal government trying to intrude or encroach upon that to make sure that something is in place rather than nothing at all. So it's important also for tribes to not only exercise their tribal courts for their tribal sovereignty and to have that in place and have a good system in place, having checks and balances and having reliable procedures in place. Um, First of all, so that the government, the federal government, will back off, and second of all, because it's the right of the tribe. It's the right of the tribe to have jurisdiction over their people, and they must exercise that jurisdiction to keep it. Otherwise, they risk losing it. And anytime that a tribal court defers or says that they don't want to handle something, they're putting something under the jurisdiction of either the state or the federal court, for example. And that is like a waiver of sovereign immunity. And that's not something a tribe really wants to do. That's not a road a tribe really wants to go down. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation on tribal courts and specifically the tribal courts of the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska. I hope that it's helped enlighten you to the tribal courts, the issues that face them, and the history and how tribal courts work. And I hope that it encourages you to get involved to find out more if you are a member of a tribe, to get more involved in your own tribal court proceedings and to get more involved in your tribal government overall, and just to become a steward and protector of tribal sovereignty.